Alleluia. Om Mani Padme Om. Allah Satnam.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony and Diversity. And today we're speaking with Pamela Watson. She's a grief and loss counsellor. Thanks for coming in, Pamela.
You're welcome.
Grief and loss seems to have a bit of a spiritual implication sort of sitting underneath it because it's implying death. What's that spiritual foundation that it all sits on for you? How did it start and where are you now with it?
Well, Norm, I came through a nursing background,
Mm-hmm.
and of course worked with people who are facing death and facing illness. The realisation that came to me during that time was that there was a dimension to a person's life that was clearly not just about the physical.
Yes.
So as I aged and as I matured with my work, I could see that really the soul or the essence of the person was the main part of their journey with me as a grief and loss counsellor too. So I worked with people just in their illness, and I watched this development with family, and I also realised that my role was not just as a nurse, it was really as a soul provider, a soul, like a container that people could do their journey in.
Right.
And that's what you can provide as a soul worker. And my loss and grief then became much more to do with soul.
So, the awareness of soul, whereabouts did that start to generate in your life? Was it something that you always had, like being a nurse? Did you always want to be a nurse? Was the soul concept sitting right in the front of your heart always, or did it grow from elsewhere?
I think it's like all young people. When you start nursing at 17, it's really a decision that possibly is an unconscious decision. And for me, it was most likely that as well. I was drawn to the caring aspect of nursing, and I think innately I was good at that, and I didn't really question that. Of course, after a certain period of training, then you get to see so many things, and you then develop. Well, you mature as well, of course. You mature in your life, in your experience, and as my experience matured, then I started to see that, like when women were giving birth, that there was more to that than just a physical body giving birth to a physical body.
Yes.
And I started to enter into that. Sometimes unconsciously, I believe, but as I matured, of course, that became more conscious, and I started to see people as souls doing the work with their physical body. So their physical body, then the soul body or the soul of that person was informing. Like I've heard a person who shouldn't have died. They shouldn't have died. I was told, physically they shouldn't have died. There wasn't enough medical evidence.
Yes.
But of course, that I could see that person did die, and that they. So I got to realise then that, hang on, we're not talking just physical here. There's another aspect to that person that makes decisions.
Yes.
And that's where I became aware more conscious, I suppose, that there is a soul, a strong, and that is the most important thing.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
it informs the body, not the body informs the soul.
And so, and we must talk more about that, but just getting back to how this so it was an incremental process, was it? Like, can you remember the first person who you saw die as a nurse? Is that?
Yes, I can, very clearly, yes, very clearly.
And what was that experience like?
Oh, I was very young, and I was shocked, I suppose, quite shocked. Shocked because suddenly there was an integrated being, and shocked that the body that was left behind to me it was lifeless, but I wondered what the difference was. That was, and that starts to alert you to the fact that there's an enormous transition that takes place at that time.
Yes.
And
yes.
that's what I would call the transition of the soul, or death, people call it. But
Yes.
but suddenly you're left with a body that doesn't really sometimes even resemble the person that you've been working with, which fascinated me.
Yes.
So what is that aspect of the person that makes them who they are?
Yes. Yes.
It's not the physical shell.
No.
It's the spirit. It's the essence. It's the and as a young person, of course, that was confronting for the first time.
Yes.
And then I saw much, as you can imagine, over the years. There was
That's
many
right.
deaths, deaths of young children, and I could see something bigger, something much bigger than a physical happening.
Well, that's an interesting point, because if you're watching an older person die, and it's expected that they may, and the body is representing that, and then you see a child die, baby particularly die, the parallel between those two places, you were still able to draw this conclusion that the body was clearly empty of something. That was strong enough for that?
Yes, indeed. And when you look at birth and death on the spectrum of life, I mean, you're born, but you're going to die. I mean, that just is. It's like taxes, as they say in the classics.
It certainly is.
But you can see even at birth that the child.
Death is about time, and we're just out of it. We'll be back.
It is.
We'll be back in a moment.
Mani Allah. Alleluia. Mani Allah.
Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Pamela Watson. She's a grief and loss counsellor. We were speaking, Pam, about the transition, the baby dying, the adult dying, the older person dying. And you're detecting this passing of something, but the existence of what you're calling a soul. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, Norm, in my work with people, I'm very conscious that when I'm working directly with them, that I'm working in that space, and I sometimes call it a golden space between us.
Yes.
It's like our two souls work together. It's a little bit controversial maybe for some people, and it's not something that I would necessarily explain, but I do know with many clients that I've had that it's been clear to me that we have had like a soul contract as we work, if you could put it that way. And I'm aware that in that space, and I became aware too that in that space there is an unconditional love.
Yes.
So to me that brings in the divine into the mix, so that we're working together, but it's soul to soul working.
Right.
So that's become a slow awareness, I suppose, over time, and that there really is a strong mix of love that goes into working with anyone that I work with.
Right.
It's unconditional. It's about acceptance. It's about bringing people to a safe place, which I believe is that space of the divine. It's my space. It's my need, my space, my construct.
Yeah.
But I think it's palpable.
Yeah.
With the people I'm working with.
And it's deeply mystical as well.
It is
absolutely.
indeed. Yeah, it is indeed.
So, just going back to something you said earlier about a woman giving birth, that you became aware that it wasn't just a human issuing forth another human. How did that look? What was happening there when you made those observations?
Well, I really think most of this is retrospective. In looking back, at the time I was aware that women were very intuitively connected to the birthing process.
Yeah.
And if you worked well with them, and you could often help them to do that in a much more, and this naughty word, holistic, but there's a much more organic sort of way that women could actually, they could be in contact with their body, they could give birth, and it was a different process altogether than a medicalised birth.
Yeah.
And I immediately started to, and then of course I had my own children, and that was an experience as well. So I was aware that there was, and if you've ever been present at a birth, I mean, it is quite a miraculous thing, and a beautiful thing, and everyone is usually touched by the birth of this child, and it's not just a human body.
No,
it's a mystical experience. It's a sacred space.
Yeah.
So we're in a sacred space, and that's what I started to intuitively understand, and it became the driving force, I suppose, for me to then follow that mystical space, that sacred space, into my work, and especially into death and dying.
Yeah. In our earlier conversation, you mentioned something about the fact that you felt that that a woman in giving birth is sort of close to both death and life. There's that moment. How does that hit you? I have been present at births, but not as many as you, obviously. What is it that sort of emerges, and you can say, well, there's something happening? You just described a very close connection between the woman and her own birthing process. But the life-death part, how do you draw that line?
Well, I'm laughing here. I shouldn't be laughing, should I? That's not good. No, but I've sensed that even though, and it comes back to consciousness, unconsciousness, if we're consciously aware, we can sense that we are really on the border of life and death, giving birth.
Yes.
It's like at death or at transition, once again we give birth, but we give birth to the soul. And I think women often experience something rather mystical, something rather special, especially when they're nurtured around their birthing experience and given the power that they need to have as powerful beings, giving birth. It's a very, as I come back to sacred space, it's a very sacred place. And
is that something that the home birthing process, is that what they're trying to embrace with that?
I think so, yes, very much so. And it's about normalising birth. It's about keeping birth away from medicalisation, away from control, away from taking the control away. I'm not saying that we don't have to be careful. Of course we do. But I really believe that it's giving the power back to the woman in the situation, and encouraging her to know that she has the power. the power to.
You'd probably have a view on epidurals and stuff like that.
I do.
Yes.
I do. You
Yes.
probably don't want to hear my views. Look, I think any intervention it can be needed, but mostly it's not. And I think, and as a midwife, I recall we worked without doctors to a large degree. I worked in a Queensland hospital. It was a bit wild, but look, it was about nurturing the woman through her process and being there and helping her to feel held, and that's it.
Process is time. We're out of it. We'll be back. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Pamela Watson. She's a grief and loss counsellor. And Pamela, we're talking about, as a man, I can see as an observer, but as a woman I can't get inside what you're talking about, but it's worth talking more about this mystical component of birthing, of being present to it, but actually birthing from a woman's point of view, and perhaps looking at some of the components, like, for example, Indigenous people will often have quite distinct birthing processes, and like the women will fall behind, and the older women will stay with them and go through that whole thing. So that sort of has that mystical component as well.
Yes, it does, yeah.
In a hospital, how do you... I don't need you to be too controversial with this, but how do you manage that? How do you sort of hold that? Because you're surrounded by lights and and stainless steel and stuff.
With difficulty?
With difficulty, yeah.
With difficulty, I think. With difficulty. I think education for women is happening, and I think it's generational. It seems to be generational. I mean, I won't say what generation I came through, but you can probably tell. But for us, it was about becoming more natural, in inverted commas. So we had things like labour births, and so we had, the lights were down, and that's how I experienced birthing with my second child. We had, a lovely warm bath, and it was a very natural process. I think then it seems to be a swing again, and it swings back to a medicalised birth and a more a problem-orientated birth. That there are problems here, and then of course we've got this next generation of girls that are coming through, and one is my daughter, and there's birthing centres. So birthing centres are really structured to give a more natural approach to and a normalised approach to birthing. And if of course you've always got the problems of the hospital being sued, or all of those sorts of things that come up continuously. But I think there are places in the hospital system that you can actually experience what I'm talking about to a large degree, especially if you've got a midwife who's attuned to a more natural process. But yes, home births are probably where women who are consciously wanting to change the experience and have a different experience, they're probably using that. I've not had experience with home birth, but I certainly can imagine that would be the case.
What about the practice, and I can't remember how long it's been happening, but over the last 20 years, I suppose, where men are more and more present at the birth. I can remember times when men were never anywhere near it.
That's right, totally verboten.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So, is that an outgrowth, do you think, of growth of awareness?
It's a wonderful... look, it's like everything. It moves as sort of slow as concrete.
Yes.
But yes, I think that's part of the process. I think it's having the family, like with my own daughter. I was present at the birth of both my grandchildren, and with her husband as well, and it was like a team. We were a team, and there's doulas, of course. We have now a course for doulas and people who study to accompany, and that's it's getting better.
Yeah.
And I think once again it's education, it's awareness, and helping women to get back involved with their bodies.
Yes.
I think
yes.
they lost the involvement with their bodies. I know that sounds really strange,
No, not at
but
all.
they became alienated somehow from their natural body. And look, I as you can see, I'm very passionate about this.
Well,
That's
yeah,
why they
it's-
keep me out of the hospitals.
Well, it's something that's very passionate. You'll be very passionate about.
It's a wonderful process when it's done well. It's like dying. If it's done well, it's a
Yes.
wonderful sacred passage. It's a wonderful
It's
thing.
interesting.
Yeah.
Just continuing on with the husband involvement, do you think that this relatively modern concept and way of referring to a birth is you speak to a man and we are pregnant, and he speaks about them as we are pregnant? That always strikes me as actually alienating the woman from something which is purely only her activity. It doesn't matter whether we are pregnant or not, she is the one who'll have the baby. Do you think that's a healthy way to go, or do you think it takes some of the...
Look, I think it's if there's a good relationship, obviously, between the two, I think it's very reassuring to have a partner there who has also been educated
Yeah,
to assist and educated to understand, and
Okay.
I think it does increase the understanding. You know, like when women gave birth behind the screen, and he was told, sort of outside and ran off with the cigars.
That's right.
There's no understanding then of
That's right.
the process that she has gone through to give birth, and I think it helps. It helps understanding. I'm sure it helps the compassion angle
Yes.
with husband and wife or with partners, whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. I think that's a good thing. I don't.
Yeah,
don't see
it comes
as a-
back to...
does that answer your
It
question?
does, because you actually addressed the point of education, and the doulas is another example of it too. So if the husband really is understanding, and particularly if he's able to be educated to the extent of the wife as well, of the mystical component, what's going on here.
Yes.
It can be really a fulfilling experience for everybody.
Yes.
And the child then takes on a different dimension as well in there. Yes.
Yes, and I think it's a shared experience, which always makes it richer.
Yes.
And I don't know if I've seen some men who are a little bit sort of nervous about the process, but I don't think I've ever seen anyone afterwards say...
Not as nervous as I am right now, Pamela, because we're out of time,
Yes.
but we really need to talk more about this.
Yes.
Can we speak next week, and we'll talk about death and dying,
Yes.
and some other interesting topics.
Indeed.
Thank you very much. You've been watching Harmony and Diversity, and we'll be back next week, and we'll be speaking with Pamela Watson. Bye for now, and thanks for watching.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allahu